Logos. If you've ever gone outside or owned anything ever, then I'm sure you're more than familiar with logos being shoved into your face 24/7 all the time forever. A lot of logos have a surprising amount of thought and effort put into them in order to be easily recognizable, aesthetically pleasing, and pretty legible at pretty much any size. Or at least that's the case for the majority of logos, because when it comes to extreme music genres, all these rules just get thrown right out the window. Metal bands have the best logos in my opinion. By treating all the dumb traditional rules of logo design as optional, it's able to be approached more as an abstract art form more than any other kind of logo design. Now, I've tackled album art on here in the past, and I've also discussed the history and trends and design controversies of band merch, but band logos, on the other hand, are just a whole other beast that I don't feel ever really gets discussed properly. Have you seen the way traditional publications talk about band logos? It is like frustratingly bad. Aha is listed as having one of the best band logos despite having the same creative direction as a Microsoft Word document. In this publication, Death was listed as having one of the worst band logos of all time due to it being difficult to read, which immediately keys me into the fact that the people writing these are probably 60. A band by the name of Skyfire is listed as having one of the best metal logos of all time, which, no. This is a 90s tribal tattoo. The only thing this logo is missing is a puka shell necklace. And look, art is subjective. You may agree with this list, but, if you do agree with this list, what is wrong with you? What is the criteria for writing one of these publications? Is it just having a pulse? Is that it? So I want to take matters into my own hands and talk about band logos the way I feel like they should be talked about, as a legitimate art form. It's calligraphy pushed to the extreme. It's typography and illustration being blended into something that's borderline avant-garde. And even when it's not super artsy, it can still be incredibly interesting and diverse, and there's so many micro trends and gimmicks that I just never really see get talked about ever. It's always just boiled down to surface level publications and pog face craziest metal logos ever YouTube videos, and that's just so lame. I hate saying that because I'm inadvertently calling out 90% of metal YouTubers, but do we really need another video of
what does that even say, man? That's a band? What is that?
We're gonna talk about the best artists out there and what makes them so good and the application of said logos into the artwork itself, and I'm spoiling the entire video, so I'm gonna stop listing stuff off now. So without further ado, I think it's about time we talk about the art of band logos. The key aspects of typographic design is legibility and readability, which are technically two different things, and maintaining both of these things regardless of the size of your typeface. You could do that, if you're a nerd. Legibility is meant to be open, inviting, and accessible, whereas a lot of bands in heavier music subgenres pride themselves on being the exact opposite. And that sentiment is reflected within its typography. Having logos look so extreme is a legitimate barrier for a handful of people, so it weirdly kind of acts as one of those roller coaster height requirement signs, only for appreciating harsh art forms. It's both a legitimate art statement that serves a practical function at keeping things underground, while simultaneously just kind of being a little edgelord for fun, which are two of my favorite things. One thing that's really common that I really love is when bands blur the line between illustration and calligraphy. The two can combine just to add a little bit of a visual flair by adding a forest or a goat or crosses or something into the lettering. This can be seen in logos like a Deliriant Nerve with its nerves, Skinless with its lack of skin, these two with insect imagery. Despondent Moon has a moon in it, and it also just kind of generally looks like a forest. Lorna Shore has a forest too, Winter Mist has a forest, Meyer Lore has a forest, these guys have a forest. A lot of bands use forests, if I'm being frank. There's logos with candles, bat wings, snakes, sometimes even candles, bat wings, and snakes, but all at once this time. But all of those are just pretty tame examples, because there's a lot of times where calligraphy and illustration can get so intertwined that it borderline becomes a new type of visual style that I just really love. Take this Crystal Larva logo, for example. Despite knowing that the letters are right there, my brain still registers this as a picture more than it does lettering. The Undeath logo does this as well. I logically know that this is a word, but my brain just processes it as a picture. Logos like these are what I mean when I talk about blurring the line between calligraphy and illustration, because these are borderline closer to drawings of scenery than they are the McDonald's logo.
logo.
And you gotta admit, it just looks so sick. I love this kind of stuff. But I think we're getting a little too crazy, a little too quick, because there's a lot of bands out there that just use regular fonts as their logo, particularly Arial, which I talked about in my merch video. Logos like these are very direct and legible since they're already based on a pre-existing font. They're easily recognizable, but also sort of lack any sort of artistic flares or real personality. A lot of bands that do this will occasionally just add a ripple effect to the outer edge of the letters just to roughen it up a little bit and give it a little bit of personality, which I think is a nice touch. Some examples of regular fonts being used by bands is Eccentric, Microgramma, Birch, and Papyrus for some reason. Both Old English and Old English get used a lot as well. XXII Gory Bastard and XXII Ultimate Black Metal are also two fonts that I think everyone has seen before, but maybe didn't really know that it was a pre-made font. And Marilyn Manson, who although is not a good person, credit where credit is due, ripping off the Willy Wonka font is kind of hilarious, although kind of bad. Speaking of which, there are plenty of fonts that are used by bands, but in like a bad way that looks bad pretty much always. Bleeding Cowboys, All Ages, Art Dystopia, which ironically enough, this font has been used by Dream Widow, which is a David Grohl side project. A project with such a large backing using Art Dystopia as their logo is sort of like A24 using like Comic Sans on a movie poster. It's just like weirdly amateur. There's also Barbarian, Barbed Wire, Death Metal, Metal Show, Nocifer, Onslaughter, Death Mohawk, Feast of Flesh, Heartless, Sin of the Innocent, You Murderer, Xanez. There's like a lot of them. There's also no shortage of fonts that are based off of band logos as well, like Brutal Tooth, Squealer, Cornucopia, Metal Lord, and like a whole bunch of others. One little logo trend that I really love to see, but I don't really think gets utilized as often as it should, is having some sort of box or outline around the logo. This can be seen in many logos, from Harm's Way to Despise You to Fluoride to Suppression to like a whole bunch of others. There's only a handful of bands that have done this kind of thing to their logo, but each time it happens, I feel like it stands out more. It's a little bit more bold, and it sort of puts the design on a little like mini pedestal of sorts. Because it's not just the logo itself that matters, it's the cosmetic stuff done to the logo and the presentation of the logo that makes a huge difference in the long run. But there's a few cosmetic things that can be done to a logo to really help it achieve its full potential, and I'm going to talk about some of my favorites because I think it's cool. How a logo is shaded or embossed or 3D-ified really makes a huge difference, and so many people forget that it's an option. Like, take this logo for example. It looks great, love the like samurai imagery, it's a solid good logo, 2 thumbs up. But then you just add a little bit of metallic embossing and oh my god, alright, cool, now it looks super sick. It went from looking pretty good to looking like a genuine safety hazard, and like, what more do you want out of the logo, you know? And that's because chrome logos are sort of just like the Chads of logo design. These logos look like they're about to steal your girlfriend while wearing pit vipers, which is an extremely specific aesthetic, and yet these logos just nail it. But cosmetic logo stuff doesn't necessarily have to be all flashy or complex, however. Like the Whitechapel logo looks good by itself, but then you just slap on a dirty texture and all of a sudden it looks like you're gonna get tetanus if you touch it. This is extremely simple to do and also works incredibly well. Page 99 did an inverted emboss for document 8, making it feel like an indentation on a vintage document lost to time. It's super simple, but adds just like so much character. The Cannibal Corpse logo on a skeletal domain is shaded with the exact same colors as the background album art, really making it feel like it's solidified in the space it inhabits. Which once again, super simple, but look at how well it all complements each other. It works so effectively. And even if you're super lazy, just adding like a gradient with the background colors really makes it like fit into the space a lot more. Side note, by the way, if you're interested in like learning how to do a lot of this stuff, I'd really recommend Spearhead's tutorials. Very good stuff. All right, back to the video. The last little cosmetic thing I wanted to talk about before I move on to more interesting stuff is just adding an outline to your logo can completely change the feel of it without actually changing anything. It obscures most of the actual design while still retaining its silhouette, giving it like a dangerous feel. In my opinion, I feel like doing this to a logo can make it feel way more evil and sinister. It is basically the graphic design equivalent of a ski mask. That almost worked out. Do I look cool and menacing? It's similar to a lot of the other stuff I talked about in that it's incredibly simple and easy to do, but it often goes underutilized for some reason. Since a key part for a lot of band logos is having style over legibility, a lot of logos are more closely aligned with the aesthetics of graffiti than it is standard typefaces. And speaking of which, There are so many graffiti-inspired, throwy type band logos out there, particularly in a lot of hardcore adjacent circles. One of my favorite artists who does a lot of very tag-like photos would be Mully. These designs look legitimately cool while also sort of looking like something Jesse Pinkman might wear. But just to be clear, I mean that in a good way. I love this. Graffiti-inspired logos are one of my favorite mini trends that kind of breaks up the monotony of standard tough guy hardcore logos. And speaking of mini trends, one thing you'll see a lot is pretty much every D-beat band just throwing diss at the very beginning of their logo, which is kind of a cute tradition. Dad, look, I'm just like you! Sure you are, kiddo. Other fun traditions I like are when grind or noise related bands will incorporate the noise not music symbol into their logo, or when DSBM bands will include like just general sad stuff into their logo. That's kind of fun. Which, by the way, this trend does not always translate well onto patches. That looks like a battery. And since logos within the same subgenre can have a very similar style, I wanted to remind everyone of this flyer. It was a Haggis headliner where instead of just adding the band's logos, they had someone redesign all of it to just look like Haggis, which is just kind of fun and cute. I don't really have much to say about this design. I felt like it was a crime to not include it. And speaking of stuff that I don't really have much to say, but I kind of need to include it anyways. These guys. A few years ago, they had a logo competition where artists would submit their own designs, and given how long and ridiculous the band name is, pretty much every single logo just ended up being insane. So insane, in fact, that this logo competition ended up becoming an insanely effective marketing tactic. Everyone would share these logos to make fun of how ridiculous they are, which would inadvertently put eyes on the band and the artists that are submitting them. Which you gotta admit is actually like kind of genius and also mutually beneficial. The submissions ranged from high effort to stupid to well put together to just kind of like borderline unnecessary. They even did a collaboration with Party Cannon, which I just think is kind of funny. A lot of extreme logos out there tend to get scoffed at and easily dismissed as just being illegible garbage when there are so many pieces that focus on form and flow and set out to make something that feels structurally solid while still remaining aesthetically pleasing in a harsh way, which is a really hard balance of stuff to do. Even though a lot of logos do tend to break most of the rules of calligraphy, it still oftentimes implements legitimate artistic structure by using symmetry and leading lines. A designer that I think excels at making logos that are not only extreme but also legitimate art is View from the Coffin. View from the Coffin is one of my favorite logo designers ever. Despite a lot of metal logos just becoming a mess for the sake of it, it's very clear that View from the Coffin really cares about making something that looks good. Every single one of their logos feels like something that band dudes would think is super sick, but if you were to put it in like a giant picture frame in an empty room, a whole bunch of like New York art students would murmur knowingly at it. Literally every logo they've ever released has made me take a step back and just think, oh man, that is so cool. But they're not the only logo designer who I think is really cool, because we also have... You know how I briefly mentioned blurring the line between illustration and calligraphy? Well, Extirpate Humanity Logos is, in my opinion, the best at this style, as well as just being one of the best in general. Despite having done many different logos over the years with many different styles, there is a distinct cleanness that is immediately recognizable in his work. My favorite logos, however, are the ones that look borderline Lovecraftian in nature. It's very strikingly beautiful in a way that I don't really know how to put into words exactly. But we can't talk about metal artwork without discussing the legendary Mark Riddick. One of the most iconic illustrators in all of metal is Mark Riddick, hands down. He's worked for essentially everyone at this point, where even if you're just a casual metal fan, I can guarantee you've seen some of his artwork on a t-shirt before. But we're not talking about t-shirt designs, we're talking about logos. Although it is not his main work, he is a great logo designer as well. One sort of mini trend that I've seen emerge over the past few years is having a Mark Riddick logo redesign. It's been done by Slipknot, Metalocalypse, Dragon Force, Inferi, Carnifex, and like a bunch of others. This kind of thing has become popular enough where bands are getting the Mark Riddick logo redesign treatment from artists besides Mark Riddick, kind of growing the trend beyond just himself. Which, side note by the way, he's also done logos for Rihanna, Justin Bieber, and Ghost Adventures, which I just think is kind of funny. I find it hilarious that Justin Bieber's management hired this guy to make a logo that is fully legible and commercially friendly. I mean, that's like hiring Picasso to make corporate art. I'm glad he got that bag, of course, and the logo does look good. It's just an odd decision. And speaking of odd management decisions, if you're wondering why I showed this image instead of just showing a photo of the work he did for Rihanna, it's because Rihanna's management won't allow anyone to see it. I'm aware that mainstream music stuff handles things differently, but I can't wrap my head around wanting to protect art from being seen, aka the point. Why even bother commissioning him at all if no one's allowed to look at the art, unless if they're in a stadium so far away that they can't see it? I don't know, I don't understand. Let's move on. There are plenty of other logo artists out there that I just absolutely love and whose work has been been used periodically behind me. They all deserve your time and attention and support, so please go follow and commission them if you want. They're all great. But in addition to the artists, there are plenty of individual logos that I really want to info dump about as well, so I'm gonna do that now. Like, you gotta admit, this just looks so sick, doesn't it? While most logos have a general outline that fits into a more rectangular shape, 200 over here really breaks the mold by having such an odd general, like, dimensions. It's like the Nepal flag of band logos. It's just neat. Cattle also breaks the general shape mold a little bit by having a long, scraggly arm that extends way further than it should logically go, and yet it works extremely well. No Cure looks like one of those things you set out to make sure a bird doesn't sit on a sign, but like in a cool way. The same goes for Revenge and Gulch and Scalp, and well, I guess a lot of logos kind of look like this, but you get the point. Organ Failure looks like someone sneezed on a piece of paper, and I mean that in a good way. Mourned has such a beautiful logo. I just love this, man. The headstone, the bats, the twisting around the crosses, the horns, the symmetry, just mwah, I love this so much. Belphegor did an amazing job at making letters look menacing. I mean, this logo looks like it hates you almost. Needle Contaminated Pork not only looks awesome, but the little gas mask motif at the very center just works so well. I love it. Disentomb looks like a crab for some reason, and I just kind of find that funny. And Mayhem's logo is just an absolute classic. The wispy ends and twisted overlapping of the letters combined with the big symmetrical bold inverted crosses with the bat wings just makes this logo immediately recognizable as well as radiating evil. And you know what the root of all evil is? Money, because slapping this logo on a bunch of their merch has resulted in millions of dollars, so good for them. Darkthrone is a logo that no matter how many times you see it plastered everywhere, it's still weirdly kind of hard to get tired of. You think we'd be desensitized to how cool this logo is by now, but it still holds up well enough that bands are doing rips of their logos even to this day, and that's kind of fun. Both Vomit Forth and Infuri both have a very architecture type feel to their logos, which I just really appreciate and I wish we saw more of. I also love logos that look like nondescript machinery like Volvoid and Vector. I wish more logo designers did stuff in the style because it just looks so good. Limp Bizkit's logo is based off of the Major League Baseball logo, which is prominently featured on the classic Fred Durst hat. This is both extremely smart branding and extremely weird branding to have your nu metal band be based off of baseball. And speaking of branding, Party Cannon is also listed as one of the worst logos ever by those garbage publications I talked about at the beginning, which although it is not an appealing logo by any means, the amount of free press that they've gotten just for having a goofy logo is pretty unmatched. I think that this logo is an S tier in terms of branding, but an F tier in terms of aesthetics, but frankly, I feel like that balances out well enough. But according to the branding experts that wrote this publication, it is not an effective logo because its resemblance with the Toys R Us logo appears uninspired. Bro, it's satire. But hey, I'd be mad too if my publication had less brand recognition than a 2010 Scottish slam band. Basically, although this logo is kind of ugly, it is extremely effective, and that combined with super bad samples is a win in my book. Also, the Korn logo is really iconic despite being just kind of objectively ugly. It was written by Jonathan Davis with his left hand with crayon on an envelope just to make it look all nice and rugged. They also specifically mirrored the backwards R after the Toys R Us logo, which according to some publications means it's a bad logo all of the sudden. Also, not metal related, but Skrillex's logos are pretty cool in my book. I especially like the new rendition, however. It feels like something straight out of Jet Set Radio almost. It's designed by Number 3, aka the guy who made the Aphex Twin logo. His work just has a very specific feel to it that just scratches an itch in my brain, and I just love this kind of general style, and I wish it was implemented more because it's so good. Black Tongue's logo made some people mad because they couldn't piece together that the top and the bottom are separate words. A very similar thing can be found with Mortal Wounds logo as well. Having the first and second word be stitched together in a way that looks like it's almost one word is really unique and cool, even though it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the first time you see it. And all these logos are also really cool, but just not really worth talking about for 5 minutes, so we're gonna move along. So we've discussed all the logos that I think are really good, but there are plenty of logos that are like good, but like could be better. After the Burial has the most okay logo I've ever seen. Same with the old Acacia Strain logo. Neither are bad per se, but they just kind of have the personality of a brick wall. Brand of Sacrifice feels like borderline unfinished somehow. Same with all of these. All three of these bands forgot where the space bar is, which is kind of unfortunate. Pierce the Veil's old logo kind of looks like something you might see in Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory remake, you know what I mean? Like, it's not bad, but it's not great either. But a lot of bands over the years will experiment with different logos throughout their career, and sometimes it'll get better, and sometimes it'll get like worse somehow. Like, this is such a soulless downgrade that I genuinely don't understand why anyone thought this was a good idea. Attack went from cheesy looking to cheesy looking in a different font. Demi Borger's old logo was cool, but their new one, boo! Gladiator movie poster looking font, get out of here. Rings of Saturn, a band that is still technically active, but only gets referred to in the past tense, also had a redesign, which everyone kind of responded with, it's fine. Tool went from looking like a Home Depot advertisement to getting progressively more and more galaxy-brained throughout their career. Tsunami had a short run where they were trying out this logo, and people really did not like it. It works great as an alternative logo to diversify merch designs or whatever, but as a replacement, nah. A lot of people tend to prefer the old Cannibal Corpse logo, but if I'm being honest, I really like the new one more. Both logos feel dangerous, but the original feels dangerous in a wrong turn kind of way, whereas the current logo feels dangerous in like a Jason Voorhees kind of way. It feels very direct and calculated, whereas the original feels a little bit more wily and improvisational, and I feel like this does a better job at representing their sound, but that's just my opinion. Full of Hell has had 3 main logos over the years, excluding some merch one-offs, and if I'm being honest, I don't really have a favorite. They're all super cool. I like them all. Tomb Mold has also had a few different logo variations over the years, each one I think improving on the last. Lorna Shore hasn't really had a good-looking logo design until fairly recently, if I'm being honest. I remember seeing them a handful of times throughout the 2010s at small shows with only like 15 people at it. But even then I don't really recall there being that much demand for their merch at the time due to probably the subpar logos dragging down the quality of the merch. But boy, things sure have changed for them. I'm sure they're making way more money than all of us. In conclusion, logos are really cool, and I like them a whole lot. And you do too, probably, if you're still here for some reason. If you make logos or do design in any way, make sure to switch it up and try out new things and add cosmetics, little flares to it. Despite it being a no-brainer to try out a bunch of new stuff, a lot of designers tend to get stuck in their own way and kind of forget that they can do new things. Anyways, art is cool, logos are cool. If you don't subscribe, it means you're a bad person, and I don't really know how to handle conclusions, so that's it, I guess. Alright, bye. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it with someone. That would really help me out the most. I'd really appreciate it. This video took a long time to make, not due to laziness, but because I wrote and shot and edited an entire other video, and then it just didn't work out, so I had to start all over, and it set me back 3 weeks, so that's really fun. But hopefully it was worth the wait. Thank you for watching. I'll be doing more merch stuff in the future, so sit tight for that, and also be experimenting with different kinds of videos as well, so that'll be cool and fun. Anyways, thank you again. I love you. Have a good one. I'll see you next video. Alright, bye.